Hello, everybody. Welcome to Beyond Words, an annual celebration of Writers Guild Award nominees for screenwriting, hosted by the Writers Guild Foundation this year in partnership with Final Draft, Variety, and The Blacklist. I'm Franklin Leonard, founder and CEO of The Blacklist. If you're at all interested in what we do, feel free to check us out online, blcklst.com, but that is not why we're here today. But needless to say, it is a real delight to be here today moderating this conversation. If you're here, you probably realize just how absurd it is to have this much a collection of screenwriting talent in one conversation. And we're going to get to that very quickly. But before we meet this year's nominees for Adapted Screenplay, let's take a look at the clips from their nominated films. I'm just going to assume that everybody is applauding wherever they are, because this great work definitely deserves it. And without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and bring our nominees to your screens. So I'll just have them come on video now. We've got Guillermo del Toro for Nightmare Alley, Sean Heder for CODA, Stephen Levinson for Tick, Tick, Boom, Tony Kushner, West Side Story, John Spates, Denis Villeneuve, and Eric Roth for Dune. Welcome, all of you. As I told, well, let me do this. 3 quick bits of housekeeping. One, I'm going to start with some quick rapid fire questions for each member of the panel, and then we'll sort of move on to more open questioning. At the end of this hour, we are definitely going to be fielding questions from the audience, so you can put those questions in the Q&A box, which should also avoid the long speech and a do you agree type question. Also the fact that you can up and down vote within that Q&A box if there are questions that you're interested in hearing answered. And third, shout out to Elizabeth Vega, our ASL interpreter, who's taking care of us today. And yeah, so sort of on that subject and pivoting to the sort of first rapid fire question, Sean, I'm seeing you first in my grid, so I'm sorry. But yeah, first question, if you were introducing yourself as a character in your own writing style in a script, what would that description be? And this is sort of a cheat on the self-description for Zoom purposes question.
Okay, this is not going to be great, but you always got to write the bad version first, right? And then you go back and make it better later. I'd say Sean Heder, former Williamsburg hipster turned tired mom.
It works. Second question, complete this sentence. I write movies about?
Dysfunctional family.
Third question, how many years did it take from realizing that you wanted to be a screenwriter to when you became a member of the WGA?
I did a quick pivot in my life. So I would say 2 or 3.
And then last question, favorite bit of storytelling that is not a movie or television show?
In existence or
in existence, in the history of storytelling.
In the history of storytelling. I mean, I don't know, you guys, watching Troy Kotzer from CODA from my movie tell a story in a bar to a bunch of hearing people and watching him in ASL tell that story and have everybody laughing. So I would say, honestly, now, like watching someone in ASL tell a story, even if you don't sign ASL, is kind of my new favorite thing.
Love it. All right, John, you're next up. John Spates. Same questions. Self-introduction in your writing style.
All right, self-introduction. John Spates is a standard white guy of early and middle age who believes that he's still young. What do I write? I guess the umbrella would be that I write stories about ordinary people confronted with jaw-dropping philosophical dilemmas.
Years from wanting to be a screenwriter to WGA member.
It's hard to count. It was about 1.5 years of work. But before then, I had begun to dream about it and fill notebooks 6-7 years before I finally broke in.
Favorite bit of non-film or TV storytelling?
A constantly rotating position. Favorite is ephemeral, but right now I'm wild about Stanislas Lem's Siberiad, which is something like a novel and something like a collection of some of the best sci-fi short fiction ever.
Hell of a recommendation. Stephen, you're up. Self-introduction.
Oh man. I guess Stephen Levinson, 37, playwright who is humbled and just kind of stunned to be in this company tonight. I would say.
I'm with you. I'm with you, man. 100%. Complete the sentence. I write movies about.
I write movies about messy people.
Years from wanting to be a screenwriter to joining the WGA.
Yes, probably 7 years. But if you count, like, I kind of wanted to write movies since I was 5, so maybe 22 years.
And favorite bit of non-movie or TV storytelling?
The thing that comes to mind is the Sarah Rule play Eurydice, which was something that really inspired me to write.
Guillermo, on the hot seat. Self-introduction.
Well, I was born and raised in Mexico, and because of that, in every way, I'm irrationally in love with the improbable, completely committed to the impossible.
I feel like that could easily answer the question. Complete the sentence. I write things about as well.
I write about disobedience, love, cruelty, and fathers and sons. Basically, that's the resume.
And how many years between wanting to be a screenwriter and joining the WGA?
If you count on years, about 8. If you count on screenplays, about 7 or 8 too.
And favorite bit of storytelling that is not a movie or a television show?
There's a Mexican writer that was of huge importance for me, Juan Rulfo. He wrote, amongst other things, Pedro Páramo and The Burning Plain, and is absolutely, especially in my listening to him in Spanish, reading him, is pure music.
Denis? Self-intro?
First portrait, I would say French Canadian struggling with English with a suspicious, warm smile, 54.
Complete the sentence. I write movies about.
Fear.
Gap between wanting to be a screenwriter and becoming a WGA member.
30 years.
And favorite bit of storytelling.
The French dictionary. I will say that I don't know what you are missing, guys.
Tony, next up. I don't even know that I need to do. I can prompt you if you want, but I feel like I've repeated them enough. We'll start with intro.
I'm Tony Kushner. I'm 65 years old. Which really sounds old. And I'm a playwright and a screenwriter. And I live in New York, and I write about whatever it is at any given moment that I'm really trying to come to terms with or understand, whatever it is that I feel that I don't know, whatever is really troubling me or vexing me. I'm very interested in the interface between the personal and the political, and what else am I supposed to? And there's a line from a poem by W.H. Auden about William Butler Yeats. He says that you sing of human unsuccess in a rapture of distress, which I have pasted above my writing desk, and I feel like that's kind of what I'm here to do.
And then the gap from desire to be a writer to becoming a WGA member.
I think I became a WGA member with my first screenplay, which was Munich, with Eric, co-written with Eric for Steven Spielberg, and I think I joined the union immediately.
I mean, probably a non-traditional case for the most part.
Maybe so, yeah.
And last, but certainly not least, Eric, same questions. Intro.
Bedford-Stuyvesant kid. I'm older than springtime. I seem to keep doing this. I'm almost at it for pretty soon 60 years, if you can believe it. Next was, I think somebody told me that my films were about loneliness. I think probably I would add Lost to that. Next was what, Writers Guild?
Yeah, the gap between wanting to be a writer and becoming
I actually won a screenwriting like a competition at school, and it got me an agent, which got me a script. The script got made into a movie. And finally, the last thing was what?
Favorite bit of storytelling that is not a movie or
Oh,
television.
all right. I think Tony Kushner's Angels in America.
Aw.
That's true. That's not a lie.
It's a great answer. So that's the end of the sort of speed round, and the idea was, I feel like we now maybe know each other a little bit better, though obviously a lot of you have known each other for a very long time. I was actually hoping to sort of start at the beginning, and in that sense, each of you could talk about, or anybody jump in and talk about how you came to write this script. And what I mean is, things come to you, you're asked to write things, or you know of a story or a book that you want to adapt. But how did you go from, okay, this might be interesting, to this is a thing that I want to write an entire screenplay about? And literally anybody who wants to jump in on that, I will let them go first. And if nobody does, I will choose somebody. And I'll wait 5 seconds unless somebody wants to jump in. John, you leaned forward. It looked like you wanted to say something.
I didn't move.
No. I was saying John. I was saying John, not Sean. John.
I will have the
John.
I will have the least interesting answer to this question. So I strongly encourage one of these luminaries to jump in.
You know what? Let's start with the least interesting answer, and then we can move to more interesting answers once you sort of loosen up the process.
Well, sure. Then I was in a place where I had told my agents and so forth that I wanted no new work and I was going to go do something very personal. And then I got one of those phone calls you can't refuse. And I was told that luminary director Denis Villeneuve, who is among the best in the game right now, in my opinion, was busily adapting Dune, which is a book that I have read 20 times in my life and always been fascinated with. And he was looking for some help. And so I immediately said yes, full speed ahead, and was involved in working in the process and talking with Denis in a matter of days.
I don't know that that's not interesting. I'll give you, maybe it was an obvious choice, but I don't know that it's not interesting. Denis, do you want to talk a little bit about how you sort of came to make the decision to embark on Dune?
Quickly, I will say that it's a book I read 40 years ago and that stayed with me through the years. And when I came, I started to work in Los Angeles. Every time someone was asking me what would be my dream project if I had such thing, and the thing that was always popping in my mind was Dune, making a new adaptation of this book that will be closer to what I had envisioned when I read it when I was young. And it's an old obsession. It's really one of my oldest obsession. And when Legendary got the rights, we had an immediate meeting that lasted 45 seconds, which is the truth. We just shook hands and said, let's do this together, because it was too much of an old dream of mine. Voilà.
Is there any, and this is also a general question, and we can go back to the question of sort of how you found this, but when there's a project that has been the dream, is there any additional fear that goes with that because it is the potential for a dream realized?
Absolutely. When I say I was making movies about fear, the main fear during this project was by far to disappoint the teenagers inside me that had dreams so big. I remember one of my first conversation I had with Hans Zimmer about that got on board right away, and we would look at each other saying that because it shared the same passion for the book, and we truly considered for a minute, was it the worst idea on earth to try to tackle one of your old childhood dream? Were we bound to disappoint ourselves?
I have to imagine that there's an element of that, Tony, with West Side Story. I might be wrong about that, and I'm guessing similarly, Stephen, with Tick, Tick, Boom. I'm just curious if y'all could talk a little bit about sort of the opportunity presenting itself and the process of coming to the conclusion to do it. Like, how did you think about it? Tony,
Yeah. Stephen, did you want to start? Or
No, please.
A little bit of like everything that I've done in film basically has been because Stephen asked me to. I've written 4 movies. One is coming out next year, and they've all been for him. So unlike plays, I seem to sort of wait around till somebody comes and says, do you want to do something? But I love West Side Story very much. And yeah, I mean, when Denis was talking about his feelings about Dune, I mean, it's, I think everybody who worked on the project absolutely adored the musical and the 61 film version. And there was a great deal of anxiety about not living up to works of art that were immensely important to us. I didn't get to say, when you had asked about favorite forms of storytelling, I didn't get to say what mine was, and it's sort of connected to this. I don't know if this is like the absolute ultimate, but since Sondheim died, I've been going back and listening to his stuff over and over again. And I've become obsessed recently with the song from Pacific Overture's Bowler Hat, which is a very, very short, it's 5 verses, and I don't know how many words, but there aren't many. And it tells you the entire arc of the last part of a person's life, as well as the encroachment of Western culture, the sort of invasion of Western culture because of imperialism into Japanese culture, the sort of poisoning of Japanese culture. And it's done with such an incredible economy and efficiency, which I envy and admire enormously. And I think that was one thing that I was excited about working. I'd never written a book for a musical before. And it has a lot to do with, you have this much space and this much room, and you have these songs, and you can reset them and recast them, but you have to work with something that's already given. And I found that really thrilling to do.
Yeah, Stephen, I mean, while we're talking about musicals, I feel like we've managed to now stack 3 questions on top of you. But
Yeah.
what was the experience of sort of, hey, this thing is possible, am I going to do it? And then how do I do it?
Yeah, well, I think for me, the story really begins when I was 12 years old and I saw Rent for the first time. And it really shook me up and kind of transformed the way I viewed theater and the way I understood. I think up until that point, I loved musicals as a kid and I loved plays, but they always seemed like something from long ago and far away. Rodgers and Hammerstein and, West Side Story, all of these things felt like, I didn't know that real people had written them. It didn't really feel that way. They felt so canonical. And Rent felt kind of messy and urgent and contemporary in a way that nothing else that I had seen felt. And so I really fell in love with that show as a kid. And so many, many years later, when Lynn and I started talking about this idea of adapting Tick, Tick, Boom, I was thrilled at the idea and felt like this was a story. It was really Jonathan Larson's story about himself and his own life and his own struggle that he wrote in the middle of that struggle. He wrote it when he was 30 years old, about what it was like to be 30 years old and a composer that nobody wanted to produce his work. And in hindsight, we could look at that story differently because we knew what came next after Tick, Tick, Boom. And I think what was so compelling to me about Tick, Tick, Boom from the beginning is that it really is the story of a failure and of catastrophe. It's Jonathan worked for 8 years on this musical called Superbia that really never got off the ground and really never amounted to what he wanted it to. And I think for all of us, I'm guessing as writers, we have so many, there's many more projects that don't happen than do. And that feeling of defeat, that feeling of failure is something that a lot of artist stories don't really talk about. Or the artist story is generally sort of like the failure on the road to great triumph. And I liked the idea of this story that was about, what it is to give your heart to something for a long period of time and to give it your all and it still doesn't work because it's something that it's a feeling I know well and kind of, felt fascinating to me.
I'm curious about the origin story of this movie for you, because it is based on a pre-existing film, but it feels so personal. Can you talk again? How did it come into being? How did it come under your radar, and what made you pursue it to the extent to get it made?
Yeah. Or this is John or Sean?
Sean.
Oh, now I'm going to
This
be
time
doing
is
this
you.
for the
This
rest
time
of
is
the
you. Exactly.
This time it is me. I mean, I'm very much relating to what Stephen is talking about. My first film, you know, I wrote about an experience that I had. I made a short film when I was at AFI that went to Cannes and like, you know, won an award in the Cinefondazione at Cannes. And suddenly everyone was like, ride this momentum and make a movie. And I wrote it into a feature. And then it took me 10 years to get that feature made, my first movie. So it was just like, I felt like a crazy person who was dragging around this thing and trying to get it made and trying to get the money, and no one believed in me. You know, it was just this thing. And I kept rewriting that script. I probably wrote 65 drafts of that script over the time, you know. And so it was interesting when I made that film and then that film went to Sundance and suddenly it was like, well, what are you doing next? And I was like, well, I don't know. I've been like, I spent the last decade trying to make this film. And so, you know, and in the meantime, I wrote for television. So I was like sort of developing, you know, my writing. I wrote on Orange is the New Black for the first 3 seasons, as Denis is proving today with his orange among all our black. But so I was working and I was writing, but I wasn't like, I didn't like have my next project. And so, yes, I was sent this, you know, and also after I made that film, all I was sent was teenage girls' stories. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, really? Like, is that all? Like, I'm a woman director, so I'm just, all I'm suited to do apparently is tell stories of high school girls. And so I kind of kept looking at this material and then this was sent to me, this French film, La Famille Belier. And I was like, oh, I roll another teenage girl story. And yet I watched it. And I was so struck by several things. I think one, the character at the center is so compelling to me. I mean, the idea of this CODA, which is a child of deaf adults who sort of lives both in the deaf world and the hearing world and is navigating between the two, and is also this sort of electrical wire between her family and the outside community, and that time in life when you're trying to individuate from your family and figure out who you are as a person, and yet everything about you seems completely wrapped up and interconnected and entangled with who they are. And so I just very much connected to that idea of the character at the center. And there were so many missed opportunities with the French film. You know, they used hearing actors to play deaf. They didn't really fully explore ASL on screen. It felt like the depth of that character, the potential of the story hadn't fully been realized. And then I would say it was almost like a slow burn. And my research in order to start writing is what made me fall in love with the movie and made it so personal. I mean, I think once I became, you know, deep into the deaf community, and I would go to Gloucester and hang out with those fishermen and go out on their boats with them. And it just, I think my research invested me more and more. And I started seeing parallels between my own life and my own experience. And, you know, whatever it was, I'm a child of immigrants. And suddenly that seemed to be very relevant to the story, this kind of cultural disconnect. So I think it was a slow process for me. And yet to become like that personally invested. And yet the more that I dove into it, the more it got imbued with, you know, this humor in this family, became the out of line humor of my own parents. And, you know, because I was writing for a place that I knew really well, the quarry that these kids jump off was the quarry I would jump off as a teenager. And it just became a very, very personal film. And then you look back and you kind of go, well, it felt inevitable. I've always been drawn to telling stories of marginalized people or outsiders. And it struck me that there was nothing to look at. Like when I went to try to look at films that had represented deaf culture, or a deaf family, like I'd never seen a deaf family sit around a dinner table and hang out. I'd never seen that on film. And so my investment in getting the film made, suddenly I felt like it had to exist, and I was going to fight to the death to make it exist. And I also wasn't going to let it take 10 years like the first one. So anyway, I don't know if that answered that, but.
No, I think it did. Guillermo, Eric, do you guys want to talk about sort of your processes on coming to either of these projects, or should we jump forward to a new question?
Eric, why don't you start?
No, I think we're outnumbering people with Dune. So why don't we, Guillermo, whatever you have to say, or we can talk. I'll talk about anything you want. But I'll only say two things about Dune. When I was a young boy, I was like 8 years old. Went to the Paramount Theater in Brooklyn and sat in the balcony and was scared to death with War of the Worlds because they had stars on the ceiling. So I thought this is like the real thing. And I spent a lot of time watching 2001, and I was under the influence of some heavy psychedelics. And I thought Dune spoke to me in certain ways that I would be able to articulate certain things in my imagination. And Denis Villeneuve, who I love, brought out everything I could offer.
Right. Look, I'll be very brief. I read the novel before I saw the movie that was done in 47, and I was completely blown away by the novel. I truly thought it's impossible for this movie to have been made in 47, and I was right. The movie that was made was very different than the experience of the novel, as is ours, you know. And then we tried to get it made in 1993. We couldn't even get the rights, so it stayed dormant for 30 years, but very much present in my mind. And Kim Morgan said, first, should we try to adapt it? And I was at Fox with Shape of Water, and to be completely honest, this was something I wanted and something I feared. You know, I really thought this is gonna require for me to build an entire new toolbox set and approach it a little different. And I thought that was the thing to do at 57. So I approached it like that with Kim. And the first thing is we deep dive into the life of the author, William Lindsay Gresham, and found it cardinal to guide us through the novel and the story. We never watched the 47 movie, even to discuss it. It was pretty much, we had seen it a couple of times and loved it. And we said, let's just start with the novel and break it down. Mounted it on Final Draft and started chopping it and selecting and putting a cut board and so forth. But the key was when he committed suicide, Gresham, in the same hotel room that he had written the novel, he had with him a couple of professionally printed personal cards. And one of them said, "You'd rather die than face the truth." And that became the North Star for the ending. We said, okay, now we have a very clear path. The whole movie's prologue to the last 3 minutes. That's the goal. And we said, we cannot do ups and downs because then the ending is just another up or another down. We said, we have to make a ramp that grows inexorably, because I think noir is American tragedy. I said, we have to just be inexorable. You know it's going to end wrong. You know Oedipus is going to sleep with his mother, kill his father, for sure. So there's no surprises there, but how? And we started writing it from that point of view and writing it as a theater of the mind, because in a very Jungian way, Gresham decomposed his self into characters that spoke amongst each other. So we wanted to make it very dreamlike, very oniric, and make it parts of the self having dialogue with each other. And I'm very glad I didn't do it 30 years ago. I don't think I could have done it. I am very glad I did it now. It's been incredibly rewarding and life-changing. It changed my life. Whatever comes next, I won't be the same writer or filmmaker.
You actually anticipated my next question, Guillermo, which is about the process of adaptation. And I love the idea of sort of importing the novel into Final Draft and breaking it up that way. I'm curious for the rest of you, how did you have this thing, you're either going to be somewhat close to it or very far from it. I think some of you probably had obligations to be very close to it because of the audiences that existed for it. Others of you had a lot more freedom. But from a writerly process perspective, okay, you have this book, you have this movie, you have this musical, what then? Like how do you act as a writer break down the thing that you are then going to turn into a film? And I'll let anybody jump in on this except for Guillermo, who's already answered the question.
I'll jump in. I mean, as Guillermo was just saying, I watched the film, the original film, when it was first sent to me as like, would you be interested in doing this? And then I never watched it again. And I never used a script. I never read a script. And the things that I took from the original movie were basically scenes that had lodged themselves somewhere in my brain and felt that they had moved me, and I didn't feel beholden to those scenes. I sort of felt beholden to the premise. But it's an interesting thing when you sort of, it's almost like I feel like I get these flashes of moments, and then it's like, as Guillermo was saying, like he knew that he had this ending, and suddenly you're ramping to the ending. And so sometimes for me, it's like, if I can see these like key, like in CODA, it was like this silent concert I knew that I wanted to have. And how do I build to that? And how do I get there? And I think sometimes I really like being visual. Like I have up on my wall right now, the thing that I'm working on, like I have my cards for my next thing. And it's almost like I don't have the pieces between the scenes. And so sometimes I'll sort of have the pieces up, and then I'm looking for the connective tissue of like, I know I need the character to get here and what will take me there. But I always have to make it visual as I'm writing. I think it's getting it up on a board or getting it up on cards so that you're sort of looking at almost a story map.
Yeah. Adapting a story that you love involves changing your relationship to the work in a startling way. It's a little like being a surgeon asked to operate on someone you know. And you have to go into an undiscovered country. You don't know this person in this way. When I jumped into Dune, I had to anatomize the book to understand how to approach it. And I found two things. One was that I knew it so well that there were many scenes that I could read the beginning of and my brain would reel off the rest of the scene line by line. I had it by heart without even knowing it. And the other thing I found was that there were many structural aspects of the novel that I had never noticed until it was time to put it up on blocks and turn it into a film. And so there are sequences of scenes that would be recognizable to any fan of the book in the first act of the novel. And I could never have told you that there's 5 major scenes in a row, all of them landmarks of the script, and they are all set in the same room. It's very much like a black box play, and the hero sits there and people come in and go out and they have big moments with him. And it's all in the same room, which had never registered with me. All of those scenes had different character, different flavor in my mind and in my memory. But then you find this deeply uncinematic fact about the book, which is that it sits down in rooms. And of course, in every other way, Dune is largely played out in the canvases of people's minds, internal monologue and dialogue between people. But it was amazing to begin to dissect the book and discover things about it that I had never noticed in many years of rereading.
Do either of the other Dune folks want to chime in here? I just feel like, especially with a book like that is sort of, legendarily considered to be difficult to adapt, in part because so much of it is a sort of mindscape situation. Were there things in terms of the approach to adaptation that you noted as you embarked on it?
Yeah, I will say that as I was doing the adaptation, to adapt is a violent act for me. It's that you will need to go to a transformative process, of course, to going from the word to the image, that it will be there will be a collateral damage. It will be, but still I tried. What I'm saying is that there's the transformation, and the idea was to try to be as faithful as possible to the poetry of Frank Herbert, to the spirit of the book. But we had to transform, of course. But I never tried that much to stay. We tried at our best to stay close to the book. To a contrary of Sean, we kept the book. I kept the book with me. I still have the book right now with me. I had the book. I'm sleeping with the book. Actually, it's like because it was the book for me had all the answers. And even if I felt we work in different stages. Sometimes when John was writing, I was writing it, Eric was writing. It was like, but me on my side, sometimes, of course, I was feeling like a traitor towards the material, but it was always like trying to stay in the deep connection of what the book was about. Yeah, but it's fascinating for me that process of transformation from the words to the image. It's violent sometimes.
While we're on Dune, Eric, do you have anything else, or should I jump to our two musical writers? It's weird that I feel like we're always getting grouped this way, but here we are.
No, just quickly, I did the same thing I do with every adaptation. I've done a lot of adaptations. If it's a book, I'll underline the book. That's what I think is the most appropriate thing to include. And I found I had underlined almost everything in the book, so that became useless. I tried to do both, stay as true to the material as Denis talked about without violating it in some way, but also to try to have the freedom to be curious, explore, do all the things you would do as a writer in any realm. In some cases I saw this may be less, but it's almost like exploring something that's original. And I try to always do that. What's a different way to approach this material? Mm-hmm. And also, I think I'm not sure the book's the Bible, but it's sort of sacrosanct to people, so that, I wanted to keep allegiance to it. So I guess that's all I have to say. I mean, this is great work for me. I'm a blessed man.
I feel like the idea of adapting a musical into film feels even more potentially fraught because, as Tony, you mentioned earlier, that you have these songs, many of which are much beloved. You have these sort of moves in the plot that people are familiar with and are desperate to see. I'm curious how one approaches that at all, much less for two things that I think people do have very strong emotional relationships with. Tony, I think you're muted.
You need to turn on your sound.
Tony, I think you're muted.
I'm the only director here, so.
Not the only.
Hey, thank you, Denis.
True. I apologize. It's not true.
Yeah, I was like.
Sorry. I apologize.
Tony, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm back. Okay. So much that just got said is really interesting to me. The question of I love that Denis said that adaptation is an act of violence, but also that there's faith and fidelity to the original work. And Eric used the word sacrosanctity. I mean, and I certainly felt that about West Side Story, which is probably the only musical in history in which every single song is great. There's like not a single clunker. There's no song about, the farmhands and the cowpokes will all be friends. I mean, it's like every song is great and incredibly well known. So, I started out with I've done a lot of adaptations of plays by people like Bertolt Brecht or Pierre Corneille, and I found that the more you love a work, the more careful you are around it. It's fun sometimes to do a work that you don't think is all that great, and you can really pull it apart and commit an act of violence, or at least sort of ransack it. With West Side Story, I felt like there were four different things that I was dealing with. There was the original musical. There were the changes made to the musical, especially in the structure of the songs in the 61 film. And I really found myself going back a lot to the 57 musical because I thought the structure was more interesting, like putting I Feel Pretty after the rumble, which is the original structure of it, which I think makes that song, gives it an incredible poignance that it doesn't have when it's just sort of in the middle of Act One. So there were those two things. There was the conversation that I was having with Stephen, because this was his idea, and I wanted to sort of dig in and find out what it was that drew him to the idea of making this. There was a lot of historical research. I began to get obsessed with Robert Moses and the Committee for Slum Clearance and the demolition of the West Side. And then Puerto Rican history and Puerto Rican culture, about which I knew something, but I'm obviously not Puerto Rican and I had a lot to learn. So I did a great deal of research and kind of going back to the original material and trying to find ways in which there was, I really believe in the deep good faith and kind of strong progressive politics of the four gay Jews who wrote West Side Story in 1957. I think that it's a genuinely anti-racist musical. And then there are mistakes in it. And there are also things in it that are latent in the material, but not, for whatever reason, made enough of. And so there was a kind of a question, how much of that could we bring out? We couldn't touch the lyrics. We wouldn't want to, or change the song. I mean, I added a song, the Border Kenya, but that was, the only real change in the music. The main thing for me was that, as I thought would be the case, a great work of art has this kind of huge capacity inside it to expand and grow and reveal new sides of itself. And I felt that a lot of what needed to come forward about Puerto Rican and Nuyorican people in the story could happen. We just had to see if we could fit it in. And we wound up, our movie is weirdly only, I think it's like 2 minutes shorter than the Robbins Wise film. Although it seems to me there's a lot more talking in it, but go figure. It was, so that was.
Stephen, how about you? I feel like this is the most interesting conversation I've had in several years.
Also fascinating. Tick, Tick, Boom was sort of, in a way, like the opposite of West Side Story, in that it kind of was a bit of an incomplete work. It was a solo show that John had performed in his lifetime, and had done a number of drafts of it during his lifetime, but it was never fully produced or fully published or anything like that. So it was sort of going back to the archive and finding those original scripts, and then trying to figure out how to turn a 50-minute solo show that was just John at the piano and a band behind him into something that was genuinely cinematic and that would have that scope. And so the thing that we did was, it sounds similar to what Tony was saying before, of just and what Sean was saying about the note cards. We had note cards up on a board with all the songs from all of the different incarnations of the show, and that was sort of our spine. Those were our building blocks, and that's a great luxury, I think, as a screenwriter, to know that you want to hit these specific moments, and then the question becomes, well, how do you tie these together? How do you get from one to the next? But always sort of knowing there's a sort of humility you need when you're writing the book to a musical or the screenplay to a musical, where the main event is the song, and so a lot of your job is how do I get to that song in a way that's going to make the song land in the most satisfying, compelling manner. And then I think our big question always was how do we make each of these numbers unique and uniquely cinematic, which was kind of the most fun challenge of it.
Franklin,
Yeah.
if there's just one point of view general, not about the process we went through necessarily, but adapting is interesting because Hitchcock used to say that it's so common that if a goat ate a book and ate a can of film, the goat would say, I like the book better. It's because at the end of the day, what Denise said makes sense. All the answers are in the book, but they're the answers for the book. And in a way, it's almost like you're marrying the widow of one of your best friends. You can respect his memory, but at some point, you gotta go to the sock drawer and do something, and put your clothes or whatever, move the piano, etc., etc. You have to inhabit it, and I think that is if you don't inhabit it, you have to remember the best incarnation of the book is the book. So if you can incarnate it into a movie, those cues, those clues are going to be very different, and finding them is a very is really getting lost and found by the love you have for the material.
That's beautiful. Can't believe a writer came up with that. So there's one question that's sort of most popular in the Q&A, and I think it's interesting as I think through each of your projects, and that's about collaboration. Obviously, Guillermo, you and Kim wrote the script together. Obviously, John and Denis and Eric were involved in Dune. Tony, you have a long-standing collaboration with Stephen, and Stephen, you work closely with Lynn on Tick, Tick, Boom. And Sian, I'm actually curious about your collaboration, specifically with the community, because it sounds like that was a significant part of the development of the movie itself. And I'm just curious how, if each of you as writers could talk about the notion of collaboration and sort of collaborative input from other parties, some of which may be good, some of which may be bad, and how you go about navigating that. And I'll preface that by saying we only have 8 minutes left, so not everybody has to answer if they don't want to, and we should be kind of quick, because I have one final quick snap question at the end to wrap everything up. Anybody want to jump in?
I will jump in. I mean, I was writing a script that was in a language that can't be written. And so, 50% of the dialogue in the film was in ASL, and I'm a writer that hears voices as I'm writing and sort of is listening to my characters, and they're talking to each other. And there was a point in my writing where I kind of realized, oh, this is irrelevant. Like, I'm never going to hear these lines. I'm never going to, jokes are not going to land based on the rhythms that we're used to. Like, this is going to be a completely visual experience. And also, I'm an outsider coming into this community, and I am not, I was studying ASL, but I was certainly not fluent, and I couldn't inhabit the language in any way. So the process of translation was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had as a writer. I had 2 ASL masters, Alexandria Wales and Ann Tomasetti, both deaf women and artists, and they functioned almost like dramaturgs do in the theater, but also, ASL is its own language. It's completely different from English. And the idea that we would sit there and discuss every single line and dig into it, and what is the subtext and what is the character really saying in order to make sign choices, was a way of excavating my own writing that usually you do once you're on set, almost with your actors, and you start like kind of unpacking what was underneath the scene, but I've never done that kind of deep, like, it was its own violent act to take the script that I'd written in English and discover it in this other language. And it was so exciting for me as a writer, because it's like, the idea that you see your words on screen, I literally was experiencing language in a completely different way. So that was just a powerful journey. And I couldn't have told the story or made that movie without those collaborators.
Anybody else want to speak briefly on collaboration?
By us, I think it was a very, for me, a very unique experience where Eric started to write, and we had several discussions together. And the idea was that Eric will come up with a draft and I will have his blessing to play with his words after. And we started the process. This was like a collaboration where he jumped on a keyboard, then I went on and write. According to what Eric had done, and bringing it closer to me, and then John came right on top of and played with the material on his side, came up with the ideas. Eric came back, I came back, and then John did work. It was like really like a multiple effort on our side, because frankly, it was a beast to crack. Yeah.
All right. Well, wait.
Oh, we couldn't hear you, Franklin.
Oh, I was just asking, does anybody else want to jump in on that? Can we still hear me?
Yeah, I'll say only that often in screenwriting for film, you are in dialogue with a director and hoping to intuit what that filmmaker needs from you and what vision they're trying to push forward. And that's often an epistolary process where you write a draft and send it off and get notes back days later, and you make revisions and send it back days later. And the great luxury that Denis afforded me, and I think also afforded Eric, was a live dialogue that he was often in the same room. I would go to where Denis was, we would sit down together, and every day talk through story, and every night I would write, and the next day we'd talk again. And it allowed a speed and a fluency of conversation that I've rarely enjoyed as a screenwriter working with a director.
It involved a lot of caffeine.
It did.
I'll ask this last question, and I'd love for each of you to chime in. So I will call on you if necessary. And that is, what is your one writerly indulgence? And that may be a behavioral thing, like I have to have coffee when I'm writing or I'm listening to music, or it might be a textual thing, like I use too many adverbs. I know that I do this. My work might even be better if I used fewer, but I can't help myself, and that's just the direction that I go. Is there a thing that is synonymous for you with your own writing or the process of writing that either has been or you think will be a part of it for the rest of your sort of writerly lives?
I can say that the thing that is very peculiar for me, and now it was for many years what I thought was a bad habit, but now because I've been doing it for 30 years, it's a good habit, is that I cannot have anything in front of me when I start writing. Not a phone call, not a meeting, not a dinner. I have to exist in a bubble of madness for days and days and days. I don't want to be a good brother. I don't want to be a good friend. I have to exist empty, reading, listening to music. But once I start writing, I can write in the back of a bus in movement in 5 minutes. But for the beginning, I have to be completely void of any real life, which is something that I thought I would get over, and I have gotten more crazy about.
I'll say screenwriting being this bastardized, I'll say craft. It's not a play, it's not a book. A lot of dashes and dots, you don't even fill up the page. I'm a frustrated novelist, so I write far too much prose, and I refuse to be stopped. I'll go to my grave writing too much, and I'll give you a quick, slightly off-color story. We were doing a read-through of Benjamin Button, and they were reading the narration, and Brad Pitt said, "Look, Eric's got a prose boner." I'll leave it at that.
John, you're next up in my screen. John, not Sean. John Spates, you're up.
I've learned that there's a part of my creative process that must be spoken. I go through a pacing phase early, which is totally internal. And I walk and I think to myself, and then I will get to a kind of breakthrough moment where I need to sit someone down and I need to tell them this story. And I need somebody to be patient enough to listen to me. And I'm blessed with a wife who serves that precious function very often to me. But I find there's an alchemy in it. What we think is our consciousness is multipartite and diffuse. We have many ideas without making them real. And when you are obliged to tell a story in real time to a person who is listening to you, your subconscious mind will fill in gaps, will volunteer ideas, will make changes on the fly. Your muse gets in the mix in a way that, for me, fingers on a keyboard cannot provoke. So I know that I need the organic relationship with an audience, even an audience of one, and I need to talk out loud as part of the process of making any story come to life.
Hilarious.
Yeah, and I wish sometime I had recorded those because it's beautiful when you start to talk about the scene. I loved it.
Do you have any of your own?
I'm like Guillermo. I need a total absence of human. I love to go in the woods. I love to disappear, and I need silence. So I will say, if I need really, I cannot listen to music. It's too powerful for me. I need pure silence. Otherwise, I cannot work.
Sean?
I agree. I cannot write music. I find music takes over whatever I'm doing. I am always looking for ways to make writing social. And I think it's a little bit what John was saying, of just like hearing yourself out loud and having another brain to bounce ideas off with. And so I think, I've always beat myself up that I'm not a writer who loves to sit at a keyboard and like lock myself away. And my procrastination is always calling real people or having real conversation. I'm writing a scene and it's the Coast Guard scene, and I'm like, I'm going to call the Coast Guard and I'm going to find someone who's going to talk to me. And, but I always find that sometimes those instincts just unlock massive creativity in me, and how I can turn writing into conversation. I think I'm always trying to turn it into conversation. And so a lot of my research involves real people and reaching out to real people. And I love actors and I love inviting over actor friends and giving them wine and pizza and making them read scenes for me. I think it's just a massive, it's always so illuminating. I think immediately when you hear a scene, I hear the problems and I can figure out the problems. And that's also what was so interesting about this script is sort of that tool, the idea of listening to something was taken away, but then it was about watching it and sort of discovering your words through signs. So anyway, yeah, it's trying to, I guess that's my indulgence, is trying to get out of the loneliness of writing. Also, I love, I don't know if I can swear, this is live. Can I swear?
I don't see why not.
I mean, I love the word fuck. I think I use it way too much in my writing. And it's like, I am always pushing myself to find other ways to write what that word does for me because it's lazy, but it like accomplishes so much. But then I'm always like, there's other words that can do what that word does, but nothing feels quite as satisfying as that word. So it's true, right?
It's funny that because I won't say that, but I will say I need if he was here, he was be so happy about what you're saying. Hans Zimmer thing is the most perfect word. Perfect word is a perfect word.
All right.
I did. I was working on years ago, I was doing a play in London and a drama critic sat down in front of me on the opening night when all the drama critics show up. And he wrote about 10 minutes into the play, he wrote the word fuck on the top of his pad. And I could see over his shoulder. And he just did keeping by quintile. He did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, counting the number of times. And so I knew what his review was going to be, was how many times I'd used the word.
I had this thing on my first feature. They were trying to, at the last minute, take us out of an R rating, and they counted the fucks in the script, and there were 46 in 100 pages. And I was just mortified.
It's horrifying.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think
Tony, what's your indulgence?
Not writing. I'm avoiding it at all costs. I mean, writing is very, very hard for me. I find it very scary to do. Once I get started, it's a little bit what Guillermo said. It's that terror of beginning. Once I really get going, I get caught up in it. But and I've been doing this now for quite a long time. And I still don't know whether or not, I believe that the avoidance has some value. I think that there's a time schedule for the imagination that doesn't necessarily match up with the time schedule of a director or production. And I think that creates great tension. But I do know there's some value in delay or in waiting until, and then I also know that a lot of times, it's just avoidance that comes out of fear, and it's sort of ignoble and stupid and can actually cost you. So I have spent my life struggling with that, and I think I'll be doing that probably till the bitter end.
So I've been very selfish and continued this conversation longer than it's supposed to go. Stephen, we're going to give you the last answer on your writer indulgence, and then I'm going to say a quick goodbye. Thank you all for going over by already 5 minutes. But yeah, Stephen, take it away, and then I'll get us out of here.
I so relate to that, not writing as an indulgence. And I think I hadn't really thought of this as an indulgence, but in hearing this conversation, I always have at least one point in the process where I really get stuck, like completely and totally stuck. And like other people have said about other things, it seems to be a flaw in my process, but I actually think it's built into it. Like there's always this moment where I kind of have to hit rock bottom and somehow put it back together. And it's happened enough times that it feels inevitable, but it's always terrifying. But it's somehow in that fear and conquering that, you're able to move forward, I suppose.
I literally can't think of a better way to end. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks again to the Writers Guild Foundation Variety Final Draft, and of course the Blacklist. We'll be back in 25 minutes with the original screenplay writers. See y'all soon.
Thank you all. It was a privilege to talk with you. Thank you.
Fun.